Superintendent James Wright leaned back in his chair with a smug look that made my blood boil and said, "This school needs to modernize, and honestly, Diana, your methods are outdated. The board and I feel it's best if you consider early retirement." Wright said, "Someone capable of bringing this district into the 21st century is needed." After 20 years as the principal of Westlake High School in Portland, Oregon, I was being forced out by a superintendent who had been with the district for less than 6 months. "I see," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor I felt inside. I gripped the armrests of my chair, keeping my face carefully neutral despite the shock and anger coursing through me. "What if I turn down?" "Then we'll need to implement a performance improvement plan," James said, adjusting his pricey tie, a habit I'd noticed whenever he was about to deliver what he believed to be a crushing blow. "The process of documentation has already started. Regretfully, your evaluation this year raises serious questions regarding your capacity to adopt cutting-edge teaching methods and technology. My name is Diana Morales, and I am 55 years old. I began my career in education as an English teacher and progressed to department head, vice principal, and principal of Westlake High School, where I oversaw a 94% increase in our graduation rates, and over 80% of our students went on to higher education. I took pride in knowing each student's name and some information about their situation, and I was always available to students, teachers, and parents. "I'll need time to consider my options," I replied, getting up from the chair, refusing to give Superintendent Wright the satisfaction of seeing how deeply his words had wounded me. However, it seemed that all of that was in vain in his eyes, as he seemed intent on making his mark by reorganizing the entire district in his image and implementing ostentatious tech initiatives. "Of course," he smiled patronizingly, "but I'll need your decision by Monday morning, so take the weekend. The board is excited to proceed with our Westlake initiatives." Nancy, his assistant, had been with the district even longer than I had, and I wondered whether she was next on his chopping block when I saw her avoiding my gaze as I left his office. I had prioritized Westlake for 20 years, often at the expense of my personal life, so perhaps this forced retirement could be an opportunity rather than an end. James Wright had no idea that his contempt for my experience and accomplishments would come back to haunt him in ways neither of us could have predicted. But I felt a strange mixture of emotions as I walked to my car. Anger, disbelief, and an unexpected sense of potential freedom. Wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter. I spent the weekend in a daze, alternating between rage and despair. My husband, Miguel, listened patiently as I vented. I vented my frustrations, his calm presence anchoring me when I felt adrift. "You've given that school your heart and soul, Diana," he said on Sunday evening as we sat on our back porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "Maybe it's time to think about what you want, not what Westlake needs." Miguel had retired from his engineering job 2 years earlier and had been gently suggesting I consider doing the same. We had dreams of traveling, visiting our daughter in Spain, and spending more time with our grandchildren. But I had always brushed these suggestions aside, convinced the school still needed me. "I'm not ready to be put out to pasture," I replied, the bitterness in my voice surprising even me. "I still have so much to contribute." "No one said anything about pasture," Miguel chuckled, reaching for my hand. "But maybe there are other ways to contribute that don't involve dealing with bureaucrats. Like Wright." The next morning, I arrived at Superintendent Wright's office 10 minutes early, dressed in my most professional outfit, a navy blue suit I reserved for board meetings and parent conferences. I wanted to face this moment with dignity. Have You made your decision? Yes, I said, straight-backed. I'll accept the early retirement package. James asked me a seat. His expression briefly changed to one of joy. Obviously, he had anticipated more opposition. Great. The papers will be sent to you by Human Resources. At the end of the month, we will that you are retiring. You can use the time until then to tie up loose ends. I'd like to tell my staff personally, I said, keeping my voice steady. Of course, he replied dismissively. The district appreciates your years of service, Diana. The word sounded hollow, a perfunctory acknowledgement of 2 decades of dedication, but I simply nodded, turned, and walked out, my head held high. The next few weeks passed in a blur of paperwork, tearful goodbyes, and cleaning out my office. The staff organized a retirement party where teachers shared stories of our years together. Many students, past and present, came to wish me well. Their genuine affection and appreciation meant more to me than any formal recognition from the district ever could. I left Westlake High School without fanfare on a Friday afternoon, carrying a box of mementos and leaving behind a career that had defined me for so long. As I drove away from the campus for the last time as principal, I felt both a crushing sense of loss and a strange, unfamiliar lightness. Whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms. 3 months into my retirement, I was restless. Miguel and I had taken a 2-week trip to Spain to visit our daughter Elena and her family. The break had been wonderful, but upon returning home, I found myself adrift. I volunteered at the local library, took up gardening, and even tried painting, a hobby I'd abandoned decades ago. Yet not. One rainy Tuesday morning in October, I received an unexpected call from Dr. Catherine Jimenez, Commissioner of the State Education Board. I had met her a few times at conferences, but couldn't imagine why she would be contacting me. Diana, I've been following the situation at Westlake with interest, she said after exchanging pleasantries. I understand Superintendent Wright encouraged your early retirement. Her diplomatic phrasing made me smile. That's one way of saying it, I said. I thought as much, Catherine moaned. James is known for aggressive modernizing, that's what we say. But I'm not phoning for that reason. I need someone with your experience to lead a crucial part of a new state project that is centered on educational reform. Her description of the project, which would involve visiting schools, speaking with administrators and teachers, and eventually assisting in the development of educational policy at the state level, made my heart race. A thorough review of educational practices throughout the state, with the aim of creating guidelines that balanced creative approaches with tried-and-true teaching methods. Why me? Sincerely curious, I asked. The irony wasn't lost on me. Catherine was looking for the very attributes James Wright had written off as being out of date. Because you have a track record of success that speaks for itself, Catherine responded. And because I value experience and wisdom over flashy new approaches that haven't been tested by time, I told her I needed time to think about the offer. But really I had already decided. And after talking to Miguel that night, I called Catherine back the following morning to accept the job. And on Monday I began my new position as a senior educational consultant for the State Education Board, where I was using my experience to influence educational policy on a scale far larger than what I could have at Westlake, with a salary that was almost double what I had made as principal, and work that was intellectually stimulating in ways I hadn't expected. I followed my old school through friends who were still teaching there, and the new principal, Brandon Peters, who Wright had handpicked for his passion for technology and creative teaching techniques, was having a hard time. Discipline issues were getting worse, Teachers were quitting at a startling rate, and parents were starting to voice their displeasure. "Diana, it's a disaster here." Eleanor Garcia, the seasoned math teacher who had grown to be my closest ally during my time at Westlake, said in a hushed voice, perhaps fearful of being overheard 6 months after I left, "Everything you built is falling apart. As long as they can brag about their new technology efforts and press releases, nobody seems to care if the students are suffering." It was painful to hear that Westlake was struggling, but a tiny, trivial part of me couldn't help but believe that James Wright was reaping what he had sown. January brought with it not only a new year, but also the first round of standardized test results since I left Westlake, and the results were nothing short of disastrous. I hung up feeling a complicated mixture of profound sadness and vindication. The local newspaper, the Portland Tribune, ran a front-page story analyzing the dramatic decline, complete with graphs showing Westlake's steady rise under my leadership followed by the current precipitous fall. While the article did not directly blame the new administration, it quoted several parents and anonymous teachers expressing concerns about the rapid changes implemented since my retirement. Westlake's scores had falling below state averages. For the first time in 15 years. Reading proficiency had decreased by 18%, math by 22%, and overall student achievement indicators showed alarming declines across all grade levels. I was at a conference in Salem when my phone began to ring nonstop with texts from old colleagues who were sharing the article and expressing their shock. I excused myself to read the piece in the hotel lobby, feeling a complex mixture of emotions, with a part of me feeling validated and a larger part of me being heartbroken for the students whose education was suffering. That evening, while getting ready for dinner with other consultants, I got a surprise call from the superintendent's office asking if I would be available for a meeting the following week. I agreed, my curiosity winning out. "Thank you for coming, Diana," he said, in a tone very different from our last meeting. "I wanted to discuss some challenges we're facing at Westlake." 5 days later, I was sitting across from James Wright again, but the dynamics had changed significantly. His smug confidence had vanished, replaced by poorly concealed anxiety, and his normally spotless desk was cluttered with papers and reports. "The test," I said plainly, and he nodded, unable to look me in the eye. "Among other things, we've had some unexpected difficulties implementing our new policies." I waited, allowing the awkward silence to go on for a while before he added, "The board is concerned, and they've asked me to consider bringing in outside consultation to address the situation." "And you thought of me?" I nearly burst out laughing. "What a joke." James cleared his throat. "Your knowledge of the school would be helpful. We're ready to propose a consulting agreement." "No," I cut in, startling us both with my sternness. "No?" "I'm not interested in a consulting contract with the district," I replied, his face flushed at the thinly veiled criticism. "My position with the state keeps me quite busy, and frankly, I'm not convinced the current administration values the kind of experience I bring to the table. The situation has changed." "Yes, it has," I said, standing to signal the end of our conversation. "But my answer remains no. I wish you and Principal Peters the best of luck in addressing the challenges at Westlake." As I turned to leave, James called after me, his voice containing a hint of desperation. "The board is meeting next week to discuss leadership changes. Might have an impact on Peters and even on me." I stopped at the door and gave him a pitying glance that took more acting talent than I realized I had. "James, teaching is a profession. I didn't want to help save James Wright's career or go back to Westlake under his leadership. But as I drove home, I couldn't help but think of the teachers and students who were still there. They deserved better than to be the victims of an administrative power struggle. Not everyone is cut out for it long term. Leaving his office felt like closing a chapter. When I got home, I discovered an email from Catherine Jimenez waiting in my inbox with the subject line, "Westlake Situation Urgent Discussion Needed." Catherine's email was succinct but direct. Given my past with the school, she wanted to meet with me before making any decisions. The State Education Board was thinking about intervening at Westlake because of the concerning in-performance metrics. I responded almost immediately, promising to meet for breakfast the next morning. That night, I tossed and turned, thinking about Westlake nonstop, until Miguel woke up next to me and said, "Can't sleep?" "I keep thinking about the students but dragged back into that situation," I confessed as he queried in a drowsy voice. "Just thinking about Westlake." Miguel supported himself on one elbow and said, "Diana, you've always prioritized the students. That's why you were a great principal. I know it will come from that place, whatever you decide." His comments calmed me down, and I eventually fell asleep with a more defined feeling of purpose. In stark terms, Catherine outlined the state's concerns about Westlake the following morning over coffee and croissants at a quiet cafe. "Given your intimate knowledge of the school and your current role with us, I wanted your input before we proceed. The board is considering designating Westlake as a school in crisis, which would trigger mandatory state intervention," she explained. I thought carefully before I spoke. What would this intervention involve? A thorough examination of curriculum, implementation, teacher support systems, and administrative procedures. Based on our findings, we could impose state-supervised improvement protocols and require leadership changes, thereby ending James Wright's career. I saw Catherine look at me attentively. Maybe, and probably Peter's too. There may be a less disruptive approach in the school community. "I'm listening," Catherine said, leaning forward. "What if the state appointed an interim educational advisor to work with the current administration instead of a formal intervention? But our concern is the students, not protecting careers as it should be." I agreed, but a state takeover would be traumatizing for the students. Catherine's eyes brightened as she said, "You're proposing a compromise that saves face for the district while still giving us control over the situation." She paused, observing me, and then asked, "Would you consider taking on that role? Someone with the authority to implement changes, but without the stigma of a complete takeover." A part of me wanted to say no right away because I had gone on and developed a new professional identity outside of Westlake. But I also realized that might be the best opportunity to preserve what I had established there. It would have to be temporary, I concluded. 6 months at most, and I'd need complete authority over educational decisions. "But you should know that Superintendent Wright will probably resist," Catherine said, already taking out her tablet to take notes. "I can arrange that." The plan came together quickly after that. Catherine wrote a proposal for the state board, framing the role of educational recovery specialist as a supportive rather than punitive measure. The board approved the position within days, and Catherine formally offered it to me. The compensation package was impressive, 5 times my previous salary as principal, with the understanding that it was a temporary assignment with extraordinary responsibilities. I allowed myself a small smile. Let me worry about James Wright. I would keep my job as a state consultant and return to it full-time after Westlake stabilized. I outlined my requirements before accepting full control over educational choices, the power to rearrange staffing as necessary, and direct accountability to the state board instead of Superintendent Wright. Catherine agreed to all of this, and she added that the district board had been notified of the arrangement and had given its approval, despite some opposition from Wright. I was entering a whole new role with significantly more authority and resources than I had ever had as principal, so when I signed the contract, I experienced a peculiar sensation of finality combined with eagerness. Catherine cautioned, "Wright's going to view this as a personal attack," as we completed the documentation. "Perhaps," I said, "but that's his problem, not mine." My phone flooded with messages from former co-workers, some of whom expressed relief, some of whom expressed concern, but most of whom just said, "Thank goodness you're coming back." Word of my appointment spread like wildfire throughout the district, and by the time the official announcement was made, the majority of the Westlake staff had already heard it. I arrived at Westlake an hour before classes started on Monday morning, because I wanted to get a feel for the school before I had to confront James Wright. Brandon Peters. The school appeared to be the same from the outside, but there were subtle changes inside. Corporate-looking banners touting technological innovation had replaced motivational posters, and several traditional classroom spaces had been transformed into what appeared to be underutilized digital learning hubs. I was looking at one of these spaces when I heard footsteps moving quickly. James Wright came around the corner, his face flushed with rage. "This is completely unacceptable," he hissed, his voice low despite his obvious rage. "You manipulated the state board into creating this position." I gently answered, "Good morning to you too, James." And no, I didn't. After looking over Westlake's dismal test results and alarming teacher turnover rates, the board came to me. I looked at him calmly. "This isn't about you or me. It's about the students whose education is suffering," he insisted. "Because you couldn't accept being replaced, so you're using your connections to undermine me. Your modernization has led to the worst academic performance this school has seen in over a decade, according to the data." Before he could reply, Brandon Peters showed up, looking nervous and unkempt. James had hailed him as a visionary when he announced him as my replacement, and at 34, he was young for a principal, with a stellar record that included a degree in educational technology but little real classroom experience. "Dr. Morales?" Brandon said sternly as he approached me. "I didn't know you'd be here so early." Brandon looked anxiously at James, who stepped in right away. "I wanted to get reacquainted with the building," I explained. "And please call me Diana. We'll be working closely together for the next several months." "Actually, Dr. Morales, this morning I have an administrative meeting set for the entire district. Your orientation will have to wait since Principal Peters needs to be there." "James, I don't need an orientation," I said with a lovely smile. "I'm afraid Dr. Peters will have to skip your meeting because I oversaw this school for 20 years. James's expression clouded. "We have a more urgent meeting with the department heads in 15 minutes to talk about immediate intervention strategies. You can't just—" "Actually, I can," I said, holding up the paper Catherine had created in accordance with my appointment letter, which was authorized by your district board as well as the state board. To educational recovery activities over standard administrative tasks. Naturally, you are invited to attend our meeting, but Dr. Peters's attendance is mandatory." After glaring at me and then at Brandon finally straightened his shoulders and said, "I'll stay for the department meeting. The district meeting can proceed without me." Brandon was obviously uncomfortable being caught in the power battle. "That went well," I said dryly. Brandon laughed nervously and said, "You'd be formidable." "Fine, but this discussion isn't over. He turned and strode away, leaving an unpleasant silence in his wake. "Sincerely," I said, "I'm not here to be your enemy, Brandon. I'm here because these youngsters deserve better than what they're currently receiving." He examined me for a time, then nodded. "I'd like that if you're willing to work with me instead of against me. We might actually be able to turn things around." "It's going to get more difficult," I told him. "But if we do this right, it might also be the most rewarding." The change at Westlake started as soon as I met with the department heads, and I gathered the entire staff after school to lay out my strategy. I felt both nostalgic and re-energized as I stood in the auditorium where I had spoken to them so many times before. "I'm not here to undo everything that's been implemented," I explained. "Innovation has its place, but we've lost sight of fundamentals. Starting tomorrow, we're going back to basics while thoughtfully integrating technology, where it genuinely enhances learning, not replaces effective teaching." The relief on many faces was palpable, though some of James's loyalists looked skeptical. Most of the faculty seemed ready to embrace a more balanced approach. Over the weeks, I systematically evaluated every new initiative implemented under Brandon's leadership. Some were worth keeping with modifications, but many were clearly hindering rather than helping. The paperless classroom mandate had left students without crucial reference materials. The reduction in direct instruction time in favor of self-guided digital exploration had created significant knowledge gaps. The elimination of traditional reading assignments in English classes had led to plummeting literacy rates. Brandon, to his credit, proved more open to change than I had anticipated. As we reviewed the data together, he acknowledged the flaws in his approach. "I was so focused on innovation that I lost sight of effectiveness," he admitted during one of our daily briefings. James was pushing for visible changes to showcase to the board, and I wanted to impress him. "Innovation without purpose is just disruption," I replied. "But you have good instincts when you're not trying to please others." By the end of the first month, we had reinstated core instructional practices while keeping the best elements of the new programs. Teachers reported feeling supported again, and students were responding positively to the more structured environment. James, meanwhile, was conspicuously absent from Westlake, choosing to communicate through terse emails rather than face me directly. But I knew the confrontation was coming as the end of the quarter approached, and the board would expect a progress report. The quarterly board meeting was held in the district's central office, a modern building that always felt oddly sterile. To me. I arrived. We were already seeing improvements in attendance, classroom engagement, and preliminary assessment scores. James entered the boardroom minutes before the meeting was scheduled to begin, flanked by 2 district administrators I recognized as his closest allies. He nodded curtly in my direction but took a seat as far from me as possible. When Board President Olivia Thompson called on James to give his quarterly district update at the start of the meeting, he spent 20 minutes showcasing the accomplishments of other schools in the district, making only a passing reference to Westlake as being under state-mandated review. This was a noticeable but not surprising omission. I was careful to frame everything in terms of student outcomes rather than administrative failures, and when it was my turn, I gave a thorough analysis of Westlake's situation, the factors that had caused the decline, the specific interventions we had put in place, and the quantifiable improvements already occurring. As I presented the graphs on the boardroom screen, board members leaned forward, obviously impressed by the data, and James shifted uneasily in his seat. In just 2 months, we're seeing a 12% increase in daily completed assignments, a 15% decrease in behavioral incidents, and significant gains in our weekly assessment metrics. Teachers report higher job satisfaction, and parent complaints have decreased by more than half. I came to the conclusion that all have only needed a return to tried-and-true teaching methods, carefully paired with the right technology. Our children are responding because they have the structure and support they need to succeed once more. After I was done, the boardroom was filled with questions, not hostile ones, but real questions about the details of our strategy. And as I answered each one, I saw James becoming more and more agitated, his carefully crafted story about outmoded methods falling apart in front of him. The last straw was when Olivia Thompson asked bluntly, "Superintendent Wright, in light of these findings, do you intend to apply similar strategies in other underperforming schools in the district?" James was forced to admit the accomplishment. I hadn't intended to publicly humiliate him, but the contrast between his evasive report and my data-driven presentation couldn't have been more obvious. "We're evaluating the data to determine which elements might be applicable district-wide," he managed, his voice strained. And as the meeting came to an end, board members came up to me to thank me for my honest assessment and outstanding results. James slipped out without saying anything to anyone, his defeat evident in his hasty departure.